Hello, everyone, and welcome to 180 Degrees of Impact. We have a very special edition. My name is Matt Scott, and I'm joined by two people. Normally, it's just one guest joining, but today I have first and foremost Emily McCown as my special guest co-host. Emily, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, Matt. It's wonderful to be here. I'm really excited about the conversation.
Yeah, and before we dive in, I would love to just give you a chance of explaining why you're here, how we got connected before we hand it off over for our special guest to introduce himself.
Absolutely. So I am a current graduate student at George Washington University. And this semester, I'm in a course called Women's Entrepreneurial Leadership, which part of the course is that we have a mentorship experience and we do an interactive activity together. So I was connected to Matt because of our mutual interest in how the private sector can be a force for positive and solving some social challenges around the globe. So that's why I'm here and thrilled to be here. So thank you so much.
Awesome. Thanks for being part of this. And I just want to give a shout out to your professor, Kathy Corman.
Yes.
But Kathy is a former boss of mine from about 6 years ago now. And it's really crazy how people stay in touch and how things work out. And now I'm mentoring Emily. And so I'm glad that we could have this experience and be joined by you. So everyone who is listening and watching, please welcome Chris Librie. Chris, how are you doing?
I'm doing great today. Matt, it's a real pleasure to join you and Emily here. And I'm really looking forward to our conversation. Let's dive in and talk about, as Emily said, the nexus between, private and impact, private business and impact, and also maybe a little bit about the public sector as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we're going to dive in and hear from you about your perspectives on all of that and more, I'm sure. But first and foremost, Chris, I'd love if you could introduce yourself to the 180 Degrees of Impact audience.
Yeah, so let's see. Until recently, I was the head of Global Impact and Giving at eBay. I'm actually in a career transition right now. I was at eBay for a little over 2 years. And prior to that, I spent about 5 years at HP. And HPE in a similar role, leading CSR or sustainability or citizenship or the many different words that are used to describe the space. And then prior to that, I was at a company called SC Johnson, which is a privately owned packaged goods manufacturer here in the US and globally, and leading sustainability in my sort of ending roles at Johnson. So I've been in sustainability for roughly 10 years. Prior to that, because you can probably tell by my gray hair that my career is a lot longer than 10 years. I was a marketer and a general manager for a number of packaged goods companies, including Johnson and Unilever. So some really great companies, all of which have, to some degree or another, a dedication to doing what's right. In not only their sustainability, their footprint, but also in their social impact. And I was fortunate enough to lead a number of really cool programs at each of those three companies, Johnson, HP, and eBay. So, I've had the chance to be at that kind of coal face, for want of a better word, of kind of where you actually put words into action.
Chris, I'm dying to hear about kind of the start of your professional career and what kind of drew you to the corporate social responsibility space and the social impact space.
Well, I've been really lucky. So, I worked at Johnson for roughly 15 years and had a number of different roles there. Toward the sort of latter part of my marketing and general management career, I was involved in a couple of acquisitions that the company made. And Johnson, if you don't know them, they're the makers of things like Ziploc bags and Windex and actually Raid, which is probably a product most people would say would be antithetical to sustainability, but we can talk about that. But, you know, the dedication of the company and its CEO, Fisk Johnson, who is related to the founder, you know, was really fundamental. And so, you know, in those acquisitions, there were some sustainability issues. And at one point, Fisk asked me directly, you know, would you like to lead sustainability? Because at that time, he was doing a lot of really, I think, cool work, you know, to change the company's footprint, to change the way the company was operating. And they've made tremendous strides in that area in terms of their chemicals and their, you know, carbon footprint as a manufacturer. The idea was, how can we embed this better with marketing? How can we build this into some of the brands, including Raid, and, you know, make this something that, you know, actually is brought to life in the marketing of our products, not just in our corporate marketing. So, you know, somebody with a bit of marketing background made a ton of sense for a role like that. So I was really fortunate to kind of get plunked out of the marketing pool and asked to do something like that. And I had honestly, you know, relatively little idea of what I was getting myself into. I mean, I knew about sustainability, of course. I'd worked, you know, in that regard on these acquisitions. But what it did was it really captured in me, you know, a desire for purpose in my work, a desire for impact. And, you know, and thank you to Johnson for asking me to do this. And then obviously HP and eBay for, you know, continuing that journey for me and enabling me to kind of lead teams and create impact. It's just been a tremendous journey.
And so in that new space, you know, being invited to basically be in this new field of the company, it's a new position for you, kind of a different type of position. How did you start in that role? I mean, what were some of the action steps you took to really structure this new vision for sustainability at Johnson?
Well, one of the key things I knew I needed to do was to learn the ins and outs, the really functional bits of being a CSR leader and to lead in sustainability, especially for a manufacturing company. You know, Johnson and any other packaged goods manufacturer, you know, they're making things, right? So they've got a factory, they've got maybe many factories. Those factories have a footprint. You know, their products have a footprint as well. And so, you know, understanding those impacts and being able to put them in a relatively structured approach of how to you know, reduce those impacts and do that in a way that was, you know, not just for the sake of you know, improved carbon footprints, but also consonant with the business, right? So, you know, I have to say again, you know, kudos to Johnson. They gave me the space to learn those things, to go to conferences and training sessions, to do the reading that was necessary. And my team, actually, I had a pretty small team there. What we did was, you know, we were successful in convincing, you know, the corporate leadership that it was important that we do our complete carbon footprint. So actually, you know, working with WRI, the World Resources Institute, you know, we and CDP, which was then called the Carbon Disclosure Project. It's now just CDP. We actually published SCJ's first complete carbon footprint. And so, you know, that enabled us, that tool is really important in being able to diagnose, especially for a manufacturing company, where your impacts are in the supply chain, you know, and then also in the consumer use of the products. You know, generally speaking, for manufacturing companies, the actual impact of its factories and operations is relatively small compared to those other, you know, fuller, we call it scope 3 impacts, right? So, you know, it all gets very technical, but what the important thing about it is really using that diagnostic to say, okay, here's where we need to make a difference. We need to reduce our, you know, our dependence on air shipment, for instance, which we did at HP, where I also did the first complete carbon footprint of the company. My team did that. And so, you know, or in the use of our products, the electricity that's used by them, or the paper that's used by our printers at HP. You know, all of those kinds of things become levers that you can use to reduce your environmental footprint, which is really important for any business. And by the way, it saves money. So that's that nexus between, you know, what's good for the environment and what's good for the business.
Yeah, I'm actually wondering about that because, you know, if you look back to when you mentioned first really going from those more marketing roles to focusing on sustainability and impact, I mean, we know now that sustainability is, I would say, much more of a mainstream conversation. So it seems that people are more aware now, but I'm assuming at that time you still had to get people on board and convince them that this was the way to go. And you have mentioned that there are, you know, actual tangible benefits to the bottom line, so that helps. But I'm wondering, what challenges did you run into, or what strategies did you use to actually get people on board with something that was even just 10 years ago a lot more, you know, new to the business world than it is now?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Matt. And it was, I would say it was different at each company. So this may be a bit of a rambling answer, but let's see if I can keep it, you know, reasonably focused. So, you know, when roughly 10 years ago, when I was at Johnson, the WRI was just starting with what they call the Scope 3 protocol, which sounds like a medical procedure, by the way. And so the impetus at Johnson really, I mean, I have to say and shout out to Walmart, because Walmart was actually pushing its suppliers, which Johnson obviously was one of, to disclose this information to CDP. So that was the impetus there, because I mean, after all, Johnson's a private company, and disclosing things about its inner workings is a little bit, you know, unusual for them to do, right? They use their private company status as a way to manage themselves for the long term, which is a wonderful way to manage, right? So that was the impetus there. The impetus at HP was, you know, our competitors were doing it. Leading companies were doing it. You know, one of the things about disclosure and transparency when you talk about environmental sustainability, which is now, you know, part of ESG, yet another acronym, you know, environment, social, and governance. You know, this is something that investors increasingly are looking at, you know. So, you know, BlackRock have come out recently in the last couple of years and saying ESG is the way the companies will be evaluated going forward. So in any event, at HP, it was at the beginning of that arc. And so it was clear that competitively, that from an investor relations point of view, we needed to be more transparent. The big challenge, though, back to your question, was, you know, any footprint, any work of this nature is by its nature, you know, imprecise. You know, it's an estimate. I mean, one can never say, you know, HP's footprint is exactly 60 million tons of carbon, or whatever it was at that time. However, if you measure it in a consistent way and you're transparent about the way you're measuring it and the assumptions that you make in your measurement, then you're on pretty solid footing, because your measurement can be consistent from time to time, and that's what matters. And that diagnostic that you're creating can also be reasonably accurate, and you can use that to make decisions. So that was the internal debate that had to happen. And, you know, I remember one of my most trusted colleagues, tremendously intelligent engineer who, you know, we used to work with on stuff like this. You know, she said to me, "How can you be sure that this is accurate?" And I gave her those answers. We worked together. I showed her, you know, my team and I showed her how we created the estimates, and that kind of brought her around. And she ultimately became one of the bigger supporters of the work that we'd done. Plus, just one last thing, we published HP's carbon accounting manual. I don't know if it's still available online, but the idea was, hey, you know, this is what we've assumed. This is how we've done it. You know, you guys tell us you don't think it's the right way to do it, but until we hear from somebody, this is the way we're going to go about it. And that really did a lot to win people over and understand that we're doing this in a transparent and a consistent way.
Yeah, I guess I'm really wondering, looking at your experience, it really seems like you had to rely on a lot of transferable skills because you're entering new ground. Even if you just look at your shift from marketing to focusing more on the sustainability and impact side of things. So I'm wondering, what were some of those, or what do you think were some of those key skills that you were able to use from, I'll say, that past career that you were able to apply to the space that you've sort of been in for the last while?
Yeah, that's a really great way of looking at it. I would say, in marketing, one is trained definitely to be thinking about, how will the consumer view this? What does the consumer want? And so you're constantly thinking of, how can this be communicated or put forward in a way that people will understand and take on board and support. So I think that element of marketing is highly relevant in CSR. I think another aspect of marketing that definitely came, to the fore is, strategy. Thinking long term. How am I going to kind of create the ingredients I need to ultimately, lead to a product, a strategy for CSR, a way of communicating CSR that is going to be, successful and position a company and its reputation, ideally. The third thing, I guess, is, when you work in marketing, generally in marketing, you have bigger teams and you have more resource than you do in CSR, but you still are dependent on other departments of the company. And I think that interdependency really got bred in me at companies like Unilever and SCJ. The need to work with R&D or with with manufacturing or sourcing or purchasing and be able to work with them on their terms. And understand things from their perspectives. What are their objectives? Yeah. How can what I'm doing be a win-win for them and me and my team? And so that is incredibly important in CSR because generally you're relatively in a small team. You're not in a line position of any kind, really, where you can actually dictate to other people what to do. You're really leading through influence, and the only way to lead through influence is to be, a team member and to be, respectful and consultative to those other groups and try and put yourself in their shoes. And that was definitely a transferable skill from my time as a marketer. So, yeah.
It sounds like you really got to do like a baseline assessment at these companies and structure their CSR from the time that you kind of put those structures in place to when you left. What's maybe one of the impacts that you're most proud of?
I would say a couple of things. I mean, I created strategies at Johnson and at HP and at eBay that continue to the present. Right. So HPE still calls their work living progress, which is a strategy that I created. It was kind of a convergence of the triple bottom line and the things that the company did, the how, the what, and the why of what the company did. And so, those kinds of strategies, seeing them live beyond, my tenure at any of those companies really is incredibly gratifying. The second thing is, I would say that the footprinting work that we've talked about so far is fundamental. It's really, that you've all heard, of course, the famous adage, you can't manage what you don't measure. Really an important thing that's, I think fundamental to footprinting, but it's also become table stakes in a way, right? It's become something that all companies now are doing to some degree or another. So yes, we made great strides. We've measured, we diagnosed, we went after the things that needed to be reduced in order to improve the company's footprint and save money as well. But I think the thing that I'm proudest of is that we went beyond that. we activated programs that really had social impact as well, that were aligned with those strategies. So that, each company actually, did something that I think is, pretty fundamental in terms of being able to kind of actually impact people's lives, and really make a difference in the world by activating on their purpose. And so that I think that's probably the thing that I'm proudest of, and having seen those impacts actually up close, so I mean, maybe we can talk about a few of those. So
yeah, I would love to hear maybe an example or two.
Yeah. So I mentioned RAID. I mean, I'll start there. I'll go chronologically. When I was at Johnson, we realized that, one of the drawbacks of, a pesticide company or brand like RAID is, that people find those types of ingredients, a little bit scary, to be honest, a little bit concerning. So we knew that there was a natural pesticide, a natural pyrethrum pesticide that can be derived from chrysanthemums. So, I'm originally from New York City, so I have no farming background, zero. But in any event, this kind of like pyrethrum farming was very common in Kenya, but due to some political things that were going on at the time, we wanted to actually set up, an ability to source the product from Rwanda. So we partnered with Texas A&M, and they know about farming. And we partnered with USAID, and we partnered with the Rwandan government, believe it or not, and we set up a farming cooperative in northern Rwanda to grow chrysanthemum flowers as a cash crop. And so it was the coolest project. I mean, I actually got to go to Rwanda. I got to meet the teams there and go to the refinery where the flowers were turned into pyrethrum. And ultimately, it became a program that after I left Johnson raised helped to inject close to $5 million into the economy there, which is unbelievable, and resurrected this kind of lost industry and this additional cash crop for the farmers in this part of the world. So it was incredibly gratifying program, and so that was, I think it's that creativity, that looking at where's the nexus between what this company is doing and how it can actually have a positive impact, not only for itself, because Johnson launched a natural version of RAID, which was an important outcome from this for Johnson, but it was also such an amazing impact for the people and the community in northern Rwanda. At HP, the challenge there was, we had some really cool programs already in place that had been managed to drive HP's presence in healthcare. We were doing e-health centers in India, so these kind of prefab containers that could be dropped into a community in India and help people connect with hospitals, right? So HP technology was part of that. So that was great. We were doing things that were important in terms of, helping in communicating medical issues in Eastern Africa, like getting diagnosis of HIV to doctors more quickly. But what we didn't have was an environmental program. And so my team and I sat down with Conservation International, and we learned that they had 16 rainforests around the world where they were collecting tons of data, photographs, climate data, vegetation measurements, all sorts of things that they couldn't really manage. They had too much information. And so, sounds like a great job for HP. So we put together an internal program and we created a dashboard for them. We called it HP Earth Insights. And so this program, enabled them to manage the things that were impacting at-risk species in these rainforests. So ultimately, we wound up making it into an ad campaign that was about how HP talks to the animals, right? I mean, it's kind of, but what was important about it was, not only were we positively impacting these 16 global rainforests. We're helping CI do their work, but it turned into a sales case for HP because it showed the power of big data to process complex issues, including, the information needed to manage at-risk species. So it was a really wonderful and gratifying program in its own right, and ultimately became, as I say, something that helped differentiate the company. So that's that sweet spot. It's kind of like you're doing something good, but you're also doing something good for your company out of that. I mean, it's a tough space to navigate, but when you get it right, it's just amazing. And then, most recently at eBay, they currently have a program that I launched called Retail Revival. So, guys probably know that eBay is, has since its founding been a place for people to start a business, and it creates economic opportunity all the time. And, many thousands of people have done that and created very, sizable businesses. But what we did was we flipped the script on its head a little bit, and we went to places where, maybe the economy is tough, they're trying to turn themselves around. And we actually recruited, roughly 60 to 80 businesses in a city and provided them with a year's worth of training and support so that they could learn how to sell on eBay. And the first of those cities was Akron, Ohio, a little over a year ago. And it's now been extended to 4 more cities in 3 countries in total: the US, the UK, and Canada. So, I mean, again, not as much of a business building program maybe as you might think, but much more of a kind of, here's our purpose writ large, our purpose in real life. Actually, our purpose IRL, we started calling it, because it was just a great way to show, what we could accomplish as a company. So that's a very long answer to a really good question.
Yeah.
So maybe a lot to unpack there.
Yeah, definitely a great answer. And there is a lot to unpack, but I think one of the big takeaways that I have from what you were saying is that, if you look at your average person, I don't know why I'm thinking about social media in this case, but let's say you look at your average person on social media, and we have this constant feedback loop where, a business makes a decision, like eBay makes a decision, and you'll hear from people about, how they feel about that, for better or for worse, and giving their thoughts on things that business should do to improve its operations, or to do something that fits what their vision is. And what you're stating is a reminder for me, and hopefully for anyone who's watching or listening, that for everything that, SC Johnson or HPE or eBay, everything that they're doing needs to definitely be tied back to creating value for the organization and justifying it somehow. And I'm not sure that that's something that I know that that's not something that people always think about, but that's something I'm definitely getting from just hearing you talk about why these things are happening when it comes to impact and sustainability, whether that's here in the US or Rwanda or India or other parts of East Africa, for instance. And I guess my other thought right now is more about you and what draws you to this work, because there are, I think between the 3 of us, we're probably all really similar and, embracing impact for different reasons. But I'm curious from you where those I'll call them seeds of impact, for your little impact flower or plant or tree, whatever you want to call it. Where did those seeds of impact begin? If you could, if you have any idea of that.
Oh, absolutely. I would say, Matt, that, there's a couple of things. I mean, for me, I'm speaking personally, it's all about people, right? So, it's about the people in the company, and, the impact that these types of programs have on them, and the way it rallies, employee engagement. I mean, I can't tell you in each of those cases that I described, how it really captured people's imagination, and people in each of those three companies, Johnson, HP, and eBay, who were not involved in any of those programs, wanted to get involved. Or if they were involved, they went beyond, right? So just a short example, would be from HP. When we started the Earth Insights program, we actually contracted with our data analytics team. I don't remember what they were called at the time. I'm sure it was an acronym of some kind. But in any event, we kind of contracted with them internally, and we said, okay, we'll buy X number of hours of your time. We'll pay for that. The engineers will be dedicated to this program, because we didn't know how to do it. So we didn't have the technical expertise. But what we found was we were getting many, many, many more hours than we'd contracted for, because the engineers loved the project.
Wow.
And people heard about this and they wanted to join. And the same thing, at eBay, it's been just a really almost viral thing. So, we did Akron, and, within the year of Akron running, we got other companies, the UK company and the Canadian company, wanting to do their own programs. They have, I should say, it's hard to stop saying we. They had, people in, other countries who were doing sort of versions. We called them cousins of Retail Revival, because they were similar, but not exactly the same. So, so there's, for me, that kind of employee engagement, that kind of almost viral spreading of the idea is when you get it right, that's one of the things that happens. The other thing, again, back to people, is the connections with the people who are actually being impacted. And so, I can't begin to say how much, I personally, I'd never been to Akron before, Retail Revival, but I've been there a number of times. I think it's about 8 in about 18 months, and made tremendous friends there, and people who are, connected with me on social media, whether that's, Instagram or Facebook. Excuse me. I've followed the sellers, very closely, and learned about their businesses, learned to support them too. And so, that personal connection is so meaningful. And again, that can only happen, I guess my advice for people who are listening, that can only happen when you find that connection, that really almost like bullseye type connection between the company's purpose and the program, the way you activate it. And, I think you mentioned something that, companies can do all sorts of things, right? Companies have tremendous resources. There's a lot of ways that companies can help their communities and their customers and their supply chain partners and all that kind of stuff. And those are all important, but, you do have to be focused. I think the lesson here for me is that when you're focused and you get that laser-like kind of program that really hits the bullseye, you really get all sorts of benefits that you honestly didn't anticipate when you started. And that's what makes me kind of excited, because it's like, wow, we got the right thing here, and it's really making a difference.
Yeah.
It's incredible. I'm curious, you've worked for some really well-established companies, but what advice might you give to a small to medium enterprise that is interested in having more of an environmental or social impact, but also doesn't have the resources of a Johnson or an HP? What are maybe some little things they could do, or what advice would you give to those types of businesses?
I think that's a really great question, Emily. I think the principles are very similar. Obviously, the intensity and the depth that you can go. I wouldn't expect most companies, frankly, to be able to do a complete carbon footprint the way HP did when we were there. It was a pretty intensive effort, and it needed to be done in a really, I say, academically robust way, right? But that doesn't mean that the principles of footprinting are not useful for any company. Understanding where your impacts are, and trying to reduce those impacts in a strategic way, right? I mean, where are the things that I can actually manage and reduce and save some money, but also, reduce my environmental impact as well. So that's one, I think, thing that's a principle that all companies can apply with relatively little resource. Another thing that is universal in CSR is some of the words we use sometimes really confound me. We call it materiality, right? So, you think about what are your impacts, what are people expecting of you, and it's it looks a lot more precise than it really is, but it's like finding that set of 2 or 3 things that we really could have an impact on. Mm-hmm. And again, it doesn't have to be a program that involves, investment, like clearly, the ones that I've described, there was an investment by each of those companies, but it's about saying, okay, well, what's the thing that we can really impact as a company? What's the one thing that we could really go after and create a positive impact? So footprint's about reducing impacts and being responsible. And materiality to me ought to be about where do we take action, and where's our North Star, I don't know, for want of a better term, that we're going to really focus on and try to intervene in the world a little bit. And for a small company, that could be as simple as something local. I mean, some of the best things are local. Maybe there's an issue with homelessness where your company is. Maybe there's something your company could do about that, or, and you could activate employees to get involved in that. And it becomes something that people can rally around, and, it becomes something that really differentiates you. I mean, to me, the key is whatever you're doing, it ought to either help your bottom line, so save money or grow sales, or help your, retention, your employee engagement and retention. Those are the 3 things that I think sustainability, when it's properly managed, can do really for any company.
Yeah, it's really interesting to dive into this conversation, especially just considering the dynamic here, because we're able to really ask you questions and dive in, Chris, and learn from your experience, which is something that, I think that Emily and I would probably agree, and you'd possibly agree too, Chris, that, more of this dialogue, especially, between people who are really getting started in terms of all the work that they're doing, and someone who's more established would be, really great to see. But something Emily and I were talking about before was just this idea of mentorship. And so, I know that we're really curious from you, what role has mentorship played for you? Were there any key mentors that supported you along your journey? And then also, in what roles are you serving as a mentor, whether that's for individuals, for organizations, on different councils, and so on and so forth? I'd just love to hear from you about the power of that, because I know a lot of folks I've talked with have really stressed the power of mentorship and conversation in general.
Yeah, no, I have to say, I mean, I've been really fortunate. I don't know if I've ever had what I could call a formal mentor, so to speak, but definitely people have mentored me with a small m along the way. From the very beginning. I mean, obviously, Fisk Johnson, and giving me that opportunity to enter CSR in the first place, and to learn from his deep knowledge in that space. But, my boss at the time was the head of public affairs, and she was a terrific woman who had tremendous experience in the company, but also had kind of done a similar journey in her own career. And she gave me the space also to learn what I needed to learn. So, I benefited from her expertise, but also from her, just trust that, hey, you can go and do that, and you can learn that, and the encouragement that gave me. I mentioned before, my engineering colleague at HP, and she was also a mentor to me, because she helped challenge me. I think sometimes, what you need is somebody to kind of, especially as a marketer, I what's the stereotype of marketers, right? We can talk our way out of anything, right? Because, we have that ability to kind of, pardon the French, bullshit a little bit, right? So, but she called me on my bullshit, right? So she was like, hey, I don't believe this footprint stuff. How are you doing it? Make me believe it. Yeah. And that was really, really valuable, because it raised my game tremendously. It made us stronger. We wouldn't have gotten to that accounting manual if it hadn't been for that challenge. And, it actually helped the business too, because, people were like, wow, this is, pretty class leading stuff that you guys are actually publishing how you did the footprint, never mind that you have one. So, those kinds of experiences along the way, and then, most recently at eBay, I worked very closely with government relations on retail revival. Big part of what we were doing was, actually going and visiting cities and meeting with the mayor. Pretty exciting stuff. I'd never met a mayor before, but my government relations colleague and me, and she was terrific at helping me navigate something I'd never done before. Working with government officials and doing that in a way that was, positive, not only for them, but for eBay. So I think you should find mentorship in colleagues, in the places where, you're being, kind of challenged or moved into something you haven't had a chance to do before. It's kind of, it's fine to fake it till you make it, which is, a famous Silicon Valley expression, but, you do need somebody to kind of be there to call you on your BS. I won't say it again.
Yeah, and it's much appreciated though, because I think, you have to have people who hold you accountable, not just yes people around you tell you how great you are. And I think, at least just speaking from my experience, from maybe even the other end of it, like receiving that feedback, it is a skill to be able to integrate that. And I won't even say have a tough skin, but really be able to take that feedback and then integrate it and look at yourself honestly, rather than taking everything, personally, or, taking it as an offense, like you're not good enough, or, whatever that might be.
Well, actually, I know it's now going to get really philosophical, but I'm a father. I have 3 kids, and you know that sometimes when people give you constructive feedback, it's for your own good. I know that when I've given that kind of feedback to my kids, and so I think that's part of it too, and it's important to see it in that regard. And we all benefit, and I think in each of those cases we got to a better place because people were willing to say, hey, wait a second, what about this? What about that? And have you thought of this? And are you really on the most solid ground here? And so that to me is the value of mentorship, is to really challenge your thinking and get you to a better place. And I think in order to be successful in any field, never mind CSR, I think we all need to be open to that.
I feel like maybe they always say this, but now more than ever, we have like huge global challenges that we're faced with. Are there any companies that you see are just kind of going above and beyond to solve some of these complex challenges?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a number, and I think they're all doing it in ways that are appropriate to their businesses, right? So it's kind of I see it as a kind of kaleidoscope of action or impact, right? I mean, the obvious one always that people would mention would be Unilever. I think Unilever has been a leader now for many years, and personally, I looked to them in my different roles, even at HP. I mean, HP is a technology company, Unilever is a packaged goods company, but I still thought a lot of the things that they did were class leading and really breaking through, setting audacious goals, getting their business engaged, speaking of one mind as a company. Now, obviously, with Paul Pullman's retirement, that, we'll see if he created enough of a foundation and enough momentum that will continue. Another great company is Microsoft. I just had the wonderful opportunity to spend some time at the Microsoft campus and to learn about some of the things they're doing. They've been doing some amazing things on the footprint, right? So they actually have an internal carbon tax within the company. Where they actually, trade off internally and raise money for their activities by the carbon impacts of their different divisions. And so that's something they've been doing for a number of years. But now they're using their technology also to create positive social impact. So they're using AI, artificial intelligence, to help people with disabilities. I saw a demonstration of a product that's just unbelievable. It can read handwriting, and if you're visually impaired, you can use this device on your phone. Actually, it's an app on your phone device, and you can read stuff, and it'll read it to you, and labels and stuff like that. So that to me is a wonderful example of a company finding that nexus that we talked about between their purpose and also their business, and bring that to life. So, those are two that really stand out for me. Cisco is great. They've been working in the education space for years. I love the work that they do. They're getting more active in homelessness here in Silicon Valley, which is a cause that's near and dear to their CEO, Chuck Robbins. So, I think the key thing, Emily, is, if you want a career in sustainability, I'd say there's kind of two ways to look at it. First of all, the number of sustainability or CSR jobs, I keep changing terms there because I'm not quite sure. Everybody uses them interchangeably, but the number of jobs in that space are relatively limited. As I said a few times today, the teams are small, and so it's hard to get a job that's directly always in sustainability. However, what I would really urge people to do is do your research and go to a company that, not only says they believe in it, but walks the talk. Mm-hmm. And, you can have an impact in sustainability by doing AI at Microsoft, or by being the person who is in charge of purchasing at Unilever for, some raw materials that need to be sustainably sourced. Or you don't have to be in CSR. You can do that in the business. And I think that's really an important thing that people need to take on board.
Yeah. And I think one thing that I just want to thank you for in listening to your answer. Well, a couple of things actually in particular. I'm sure there's a lot that Emily and I could thank you for, even when it comes to just this conversation so far. But, two things. One is that you've even helped put a spotlight on the fact that there are so many organizations, and you just named a few of the leading ones. You gave your own experiences, and that's a handful of organizations, but there are so many other companies in the private sector doing this work, and as you mentioned, even in the public sector. And so it's good for me, I think, that we're able to share that you don't need to go work for a nonprofit to make an impact, and you don't need to necessarily go work in the sustainability division of a company in order to make that impact. And then the other piece is, again, and I mentioned this earlier, but we really appreciate you sharing your perspective and having this conversation, because I think a lot of times, especially when it comes to business, we get closed off in silos. And that's one reason I want to talk with you, because I know, throughout, I'm sure, plenty of your work, I'm very familiar and have worked and do work with Launch, which, has worked with eBay and Walmart and others that have been mentioned in this conversation. And I think that collaborative spirit's like really what we need to drive things forward. But again, thinking of just the time, because I'm sure we could be here for a long, long time having this conversation with plenty of questions.
That's because I talk a lot.
Since we all, and actually I mean, I love it. So
a lot of knowledge to share.
Yes, lots of knowledge to share. So keep talking and keep sharing. And I guess the big question I have is really around where you see your future going ahead. And it's a question that I ask at the end of each one of toward the end of each one of my interviews. But if your life were a book or documentary, what do you think the title would be and why?
Wow. Well, let's see. I tend to think in songs. So if it's okay, can I go with a song?
Sure. I like that.
The song that popped into my head is The Long and Winding Road by the Beatles. Because it's kind of, it's like, you got to be open to wherever the road goes. And I think that's been definitely a hallmark of my career, is kind of, who knows what would have happened if, Fisk hadn't asked me, would you like to work in sustainability? That was a really an important fork in the road, and I'm glad I went on that path. So I almost said an old Yogi Berra-ism, which is, when you come to the fork in the road, take it. But that's terrible. In any event, that would be what comes to mind. I think my career will go is that I have, pretty unique perspective. It feels like, the combination of marketing and communications that I've been certainly trained in and had, the chance to demonstrate earlier in my career and even more recently, combined with CSR, combined with some of the programs that my teams and I have been able to create. Those are things that I'd love to impart that wisdom to the next generation. And I don't know exactly how to do that. I mean, it could be leading CSR at another great company, but it could be, in a consulting role where it's an opportunity to impart that perspective and wisdom to wisdom. That sounds grand. That perspective to, more companies, because I think when it's done right, it can really be a business benefit, and it can also obviously help people. And that advocacy, really excites me. That ability to kind of inspire others, hopefully, to do it, and to get this to be, many, many more companies than the ones we've talked about today.
Yeah.
I actually have a follow-up question to that, which is really about, you mentioned inspiring the next generation. And you've talked about how that's important to you, but just from the perspective of the businesses you've worked with or seen or interacted with, what, in your words, is the value of the next generation? I'll say people like us, maybe, to put Emily and I on the spot. What is the value of the next generation? Are companies looking at younger people and saying, this is our vision for them, this is what we want to accomplish? And I would just love to hear from you, because you do have that unique perspective.
Yeah, no, I think the value of the next generation is you guys have, tremendous energy and a desire to put things right. I think it's clear that, millennials and Gen Z, really appreciate the fact that, I don't want to end on a downer, but time is running out, right? In terms of being able to take action. And so, what did I just see this week? There's a petition to Jeff Bezos that, he needs to do more. Many, many thousands of signatures. I think they were Amazon employees that have asked him to actually take greater action on climate change and to actually use the power. I mean, we talked about Walmart, and Walmart getting its supply chain to do things that perhaps they wouldn't have done. That's where Amazon is now. I mean, they are a huge company with an enormous supply chain, enormous footprint. And, it's time for them to take some action and do something, really positive in this space. And I think, people are recognizing that. And so back to your question, it's the younger people who are going to feel that urgency. Not to get political, but Pete Buttigieg is running for president. I suppose. I think he's going to announce today. But in his statements, people have said, gosh, he'd be the youngest president ever. What's that all about? And he's like, well, hang on a second. I've got a pretty big stake in what this world looks like in 2040.
Right.
So. And I think that's a fair point. It's certainly a good way to differentiate himself versus some of the candidates who are, maybe in their 60s or 70s. So anyway, long answer as usual. But, I think you guys are the future, and you guys have a much bigger stake in that future than older people. And it's up to you to really take action and push for change, because that's where it's going to come from.
Amazing. Emily, any reflections on that as we wrap up?
So many thoughts, and I feel like the conversation could just keep going. No, I love the Amazon example, and I love thinking of employees kind of holding the CEO accountable and the power of the people. And so that's just a great example of that. And I hope that more and more individuals, employees can mobilize to, make those changes, and that kind of continues. But no, thank you so much for your time. And I don't know, this was fantastic. I feel like I could just, we could continue for another hour, but.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess, Chris, where could anyone who is listening or watching learn more about you or follow along on your journey online?
Well, let's see. Thanks, Matt. I'm on LinkedIn, so if people want to connect there, that's great. I can be messaged there pretty easily. I'm also on Twitter. I have to say, I don't tweet as much as I should, but I'm at Chris Librie, one word. And so you can see some of my ramblings of the past there, and maybe some in the future as things continue to develop. But listen, I want to thank you and Emily, Matt, for what's been a really enjoyable and fast conversation. I mean, I can't believe we've been talking this long. So it's been great, and I know we could go on longer, but this has been a terrific way to kind of talk about our work and how we can continue to keep the momentum going.
Yeah, awesome. And since it's right around the corner, I will say happy Earth Day to both of you. And actually, I just decided on the fly. So I typically end these interviews by telling people to keep impacting. And that's how my final word and catchphrase, if I'm allowed to have a catchphrase. But I figure, Emily, if you want to have any words to wrap us up, I think we should give you the final words.
I think I'm just feeling so inspired by this, future generation, next generation, to kind of be the leaders and see change happen. And so I don't know if I have a concise catchphrase though, man. Get out and do it. Have an impact. Don't sit around and wait for somebody else to do it. Get up and take action.
That's exactly right. Get in there, roll up your sleeves, and intervene.
Yeah.
Do something good.
Let's do this.
And keep impacting.
Exactly.